I was having one of those slow, gentle mornings. The kind you don't appreciate until life reminds you how fragile peace can be. The kettle whistled softly on the stove while I stood near the window watering my African violets, their purple petals shining in the early light. At 78, I've learned to savor quiet moments. They are little blessings in a world that moves too fast. That's when I heard the knock. 3 sharp taps. Oddly firm. I set down the watering can, wiped my hands on my apron, and opened the door. My son stood there, smiling yes, but with something tight and urgent behind his eyes. He rarely visited without calling first. "Mom," he said, leaning in for a quick hug that felt more like a formality than affection. "I need you to come with me. We've got some documents to update. Just routine things." I blinked. "Documents? Your will? Medical forms?" "Nothing serious," he added, waving his hand as if brushing away dust. "Just to be safe." The way he said it, too fast, too rehearsed, pulled at something deep in my chest. But I've always trusted him more than my worries. He was my only child, my life's work, the person I raised with every ounce of love I had. So I grabbed my cardigan and followed him to the car. The lawyer's office smelled faintly of old coffee and carpet cleaner. My son placed the stack of papers on the desk with a practiced confidence, as if this visit had been planned down to the minute. The lawyer, a man in his 50s with silver hair and steady eyes, greeted us politely and began reading through the documents. Slowly his expression changed. His eyebrows creased. His jaw tightened. He glanced at me, then at my son, then back at the papers as though confirming something horrifying. Finally he looked up. "Let me just print a revised form," he said carefully. "Could you step outside for a moment?" he asked my son. My son agreed and stepped out, closing the door behind him. The instant the latch clicked, the lawyer stood, walked around the desk, leaned toward me, and whispered, barely audible, "When he leaves the room again, run." My entire body froze. My heart thudded so loud I felt it in my throat. My skin turned icy. My mind twisted itself into knots. Run? From my own son? Why? What did he see? What did he know? A lifetime of motherhood fought against every instinct screaming that something was wrong. Then the door opened. My son stepped back inside with an easy smile, as if everything was perfectly normal, as if I hadn't just been warned to flee him. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stay still, forcing myself not to reveal the panic clawing at my ribs. Before I tell you what happened the moment he walked out again, make sure you subscribe for more real stories like this one. And with that, my life split into 2 parts, before the warning, and everything that came after. When you reach your late 70s, your memories start feeling like rooms you can walk into, each one holding a different version of the people you love. As I sat there in that office, pretending to look calm while my heart rattled against my ribs, those rooms opened one by one. And every room reminded me why I had ignored so many signs. My son wasn't always like this. In fact, he had once been the sweetest child I could ever imagine raising. I still remember the weight of him as a newborn, the way he curled his fingers around mine as if I were the only safe place in his world. After my husband passed when my boy was just 8, I became both mother and father, provider and comforter. I worked nights at the local grocery store, unloading shipments long after my bones were ready for rest. I spent mornings packing his lunches, stitching his torn uniforms, and writing encouragement notes I slipped between his notebooks. He grew up watching me sacrifice without ever hearing me call it sacrifice. To me, that was just motherhood. He used to say, "When I grow up, Mom, I'll take care of you. You'll never worry again." And for a long time I believed him. But life has a way of shifting people. Sometimes slowly, so slowly you don't notice until you're standing in the aftermath wondering how you missed the transformation. Looking back, the red flags weren't large. They weren't loud. They were small, almost invisible, scattered across years. Little changes in tone, new kinds of impatience in his voice, subtle flashes of irritation when I needed help with something simple, like changing a light bulb or navigating my phone. The first time I brushed off a warning sign was 4 years ago. I had fallen in the kitchen, nothing serious, just a slip, and he scolded me for not being more careful. Not out of concern, out of annoyance. It stunned me. But he apologized later, and I convinced myself he was just stressed. Then came the financial questions. Mom, what's in your savings? Do you have any insurance paperwork I should know about? Where's the deed to the house? All asked lightly, casually, dressed as responsibility, but each question left a quiet bruise on my heart. Still, I gave him the benefit of the doubt. I told myself he was simply preparing for the future, trying to be a good son. Isn't that what love does? It explains away the shadows. Last year, he started visiting less often. When he did stop by, he seemed to come with an agenda. Forms he wanted me to sign, mail he wanted to check, conversations about elder care planning that always felt one-sided, rehearsed. He'd speak slowly, as if talking to a child. He'd say things like, "Mom, you forget a lot these days." Even when I hadn't forgotten anything. The worst part was how guilt twisted everything. Anytime I hesitated or questioned, he'd look wounded and say, "I'm trying to help you. Why do you make it so hard?" That line always shut me down. It made me feel like a burden, like I should be grateful someone cared enough to intervene. And then there were the moments I still can't explain. Once while cleaning, I found a folder in his old bedroom when he was visiting. Inside were printouts about power of attorney, inheritance laws, property transfer strategies. I assumed he was researching to help me stay organized. I placed it back exactly where I found it so I wouldn't embarrass him. Another time, I overheard him whispering on the phone. "It'll be easier once it's all in my name." When I walked in, he ended the call abruptly and blamed it on an insurance agent. And still, I loved him. Loved him more fiercely than any fear. Loved him enough to silence every instinct that tried to warn me. Mothers do that. We choose love over logic, loyalty over suspicion, hope over truth. As I sat in the lawyer's office after that whispered warning, I felt all those memories collide. The little red flags, the excuses I made, the unwavering devotion I clung to. Part of me still wanted to believe he had noble intentions. That the lawyer misunderstood something. That my son would never harm me. But another part, the part shaped by years of quiet disappointments, knew better. The son I raised and the man sitting across from me were not the same person. And I didn't know when that change happened. Maybe it crept in like a draft under a closed door. Maybe it had been building from the moment he realized I had something he wanted. Even then, I blamed myself. Maybe I coddled him too much. Maybe I shielded him from too many hardships. Maybe I made it too easy for him to lean on me. Until leaning became taking and taking became expecting. But I never imagined I'd need to run from him. Never. That's the cruelest part of betrayal. It doesn't come from enemies. It comes from the people you built your world around. And as the lawyer's warning echoed in my mind, I realized something painful and undeniable. I had been ignoring the truth because facing it meant admitting the person I loved most might be the person who could hurt me most. I breathed in slowly, trying to steady myself. Whatever came next, I needed to be ready. When my son stepped out again to take a phone call, the lawyer gave me a small nod. Barely noticeable, but enough to tell me this was my only chance. "Do not sign anything," he whispered. "Just look." He slid the stack of papers toward me, lowering his voice even further. "I don't know what he told you, but none of this is routine." My fingers trembled as I pulled the top page closer. At first glance, it looked like a normal will update, but as I read line by line, the words stabbed at me. Entire sections had been rewritten. My assets redistributed. My home, listed under a transfer clause I had never approved. I blinked hard, thinking maybe I misunderstood. My eyes weren't as sharp as they used to be, but I knew my own intentions. And these papers didn't reflect a single one of them. The lawyer pointed to a highlighted paragraph. "This grants him full authority to manage, sell, or transfer your property without your consent." My breath hitched. "But I never agreed to that." He nodded grimly. "I didn't think so." I turned to the next page. It was worse. A medical authorization form hidden inside the stack. A clause granting him power to make end-of-life decisions on my behalf, in case of incapacity. A word that repeated at least 6 times, bolded. "He told me it was just updating my will," I whispered. That's not what these are, the lawyer said. This combination of documents is almost never presented together unless someone is planning for complete control. Complete control. The phrase hollowed me out. I reached the third document, a property transfer request. My house, paid off with decades of night shifts, careful saving, and sacrifices no one ever saw, was listed under his name as the primary beneficiary with an immediate transfer option upon my signature. I stared at the line where my name was typed neatly beside a blank signature space. My hand moved instinctively to my throat. I felt suddenly small, like I had shrunk inside my own life. When did he bring these in? I asked. Yesterday, the lawyer said. He insisted it was urgent. That you were confused about some things. Confused. That was the word he always used. The one he slipped into conversations so gently it took me months to recognize it as a weapon. He said you needed help managing your affairs, the lawyer continued, lowering his voice. But the structure of these documents is concerning. It goes far beyond help. I swallowed a wave of nausea as I flipped to the back. There, tucked between two formal pages, was a handwritten list in my son's messy scrawl. Bullet points I recognized from his earlier planning conversations. House, insurance, bank accounts, medical decisions, power of attorney, future care plan. The list ended with, everything centralized. Cleaner this way. Cleaner. The word chilled me. Did he give you these for review before today? The lawyer asked gently. No, I whispered. He said they were just routine updates. The lawyer pressed his lips together. Mrs. Parker, these documents, if signed together, would give him total legal control over your life, your finances, and your property. Immediately. Irreversibly. Irreversibly. My hands shook harder. The edges of the pages blurred. I felt like I was floating outside my own body, watching a stranger's life unravel. I had always believed my son wanted to protect me. It never crossed my mind he might want to own me. The lawyer placed a steadying hand on the table, not touching me, but close enough to anchor the moment. I don't know his intentions, he said carefully, but I know the outcome if you sign. And it's dangerous. Very dangerous. Dangerous. I tasted metal in my mouth. I thought of the folder I once found in his room. The hushed phone call. The sudden interest in my finances. The surprise visits with papers he insisted I didn't need to read closely. All the red flags I had smothered in motherly love now rose like ghosts around me. The lawyer tapped the last page. This is the one that concerned me most. It was a medical assessment acknowledgement, stating that I accepted my own increasing confusion and wished for my son to manage my decisions moving forward. My heart broke a little. I wasn't confused. I wasn't losing myself. I wasn't incapable. But if I had signed this, the world would believe I was. Mrs. Parker, the lawyer said, voice almost a whisper. If he steps out again, run. Don't argue. Don't hesitate. Just walk out that door. I looked at the papers once more, the truth finally cutting through every excuse I had held on to. My son had planned something irreversible, and the moment he walked back in, smiling as if nothing were wrong, I knew one thing with terrifying clarity. I could no longer trust the child I raised. When we finally left the lawyer's office, my son was smiling again, too widely, too smoothly. He thanked the lawyer with forced politeness, guided me toward the car, and spoke in that gently patronizing tone he had adopted over the last year. See, Mom? Nothing scary. Just paperwork. You worry too much. But now I knew better. His hand on my elbow felt less like support and more like containment. I walked beside him, nodding at his words, yet every cell in my body stayed alert, listening for danger, searching for an exit. He dropped me off at home with instructions to rest, and promised to return later with the new forms. I watched his car pull away, waited until it disappeared at the end of the street, and then locked the door behind me. My breathing shook. For the first time in my life, I felt afraid in my own home. Not because of shadows or strangers, but because of someone I had once trusted more than anyone. I knew I needed answers. Not emotional ones. Not hopeful ones. Cold factual truth. I made myself a cup of tea, though my hands trembled so badly I spilled half of it on the counter. Then I sat at the table with the documents the lawyer had quietly slipped into my purse for my own review. I didn't know where else to begin, so I did something I rarely do. I opened my laptop and searched online. Power of attorney risks. Property transfer without consent. Elder financial manipulation. Medical authority abuse. Each article stabbed me with a new wave of dread. Case after case, story after story, sons, daughters, nephews, caregivers. People who slowly gained control of an elderly loved one's life through carefully layered documents. And once signed, the victim's voice became legally irrelevant. One article described a scenario identical to mine. A rush will update, a power of attorney buried inside, medical decision forms disguised as routine updates. The victim lost everything within months. My stomach twisted. I clicked another link from a legal advice forum. A retired attorney explained that when multiple documents, property transfers, will changes, medical authority, are presented together, it is almost always part of a coordinated attempt at full control. Coordinated. That word haunted me. I scrolled further and found a checklist for identifying elder manipulation. Every single box matched my recent experiences. Sudden urgency. Guilt-tripping. Discouraging independent review. Pushing for signatures. Referencing memory issues. Isolating the elder from outside opinions. Rehearsed explanations. My throat tightened. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't imagination. It was a pattern. A documented, written about pattern. I still needed a professional to confirm it, not just anonymous posts and online guides. So I took the last step I had been avoiding. I dialed the number of a local elder legal hotline. My fingers hesitated over the buttons, but I forced myself to finish the call. A woman with a warm, steady voice answered. I explained the situation as calmly as I could. The rushed visit, the documents, the lawyer's warning. Her tone shifted instantly. "Ma'am," she said gently, "those documents, signed together, would give someone full control over your finances, your medical decisions, and your property. This is extremely concerning." Extremely concerning. Hearing it from a stranger made it real in a way my own thoughts couldn't. She continued. "If the lawyer warned you, he saw something serious. You need to protect yourself immediately. Do not sign anything. And do not be alone with anyone pressuring you." Anyone. She didn't say your son. She didn't have to. Her voice lowered. "You're in a vulnerable position. People don't always show their intentions openly." I closed my eyes. I never thought he'd do something like this. "Most people don't," she replied softly. "That's why it works." By the time I hung up, the truth stood in front of me with cold clarity. If I had signed those documents, every piece of my life, my home, my independence, even my medical decisions, would belong to him. Not shared. Not protected. Owned. And the realization settled like a weight on my chest. My son was not trying to help me. He was trying to prepare the world to erase my voice. The next morning, my son arrived earlier than usual. So early the sun had barely lifted above the rooftops. I was still in my robe, standing at the stove warming oatmeal, when his fist knocked against the door with impatient force. I opened it to find him holding a new stack of papers under his arm. "Mom," he said, stepping inside without waiting for me to invite him. "We need to finish what we started yesterday." His voice was controlled. Too controlled. The kind of control someone uses when they're barely holding back frustration. He set the papers on the table, pulling out a chair for me as if I were a child who needed directing. "Come sit. Let's get this done." The tone made my stomach twist. I tried to keep my own voice steady. "I'd like more time to review everything." He laughed an abrupt, sharp sound. "Review? Mom, it's paperwork. Routine. The lawyer already explained it." No. The lawyer had warned me to run. But I couldn't say that. "Not yet. I still want to read it," I insisted. His smile tightened. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." He paced once, then faced me with a sigh. "Look, I'm trying to help you. You forget things. You get confused. You said so yourself the other day." I never said that, I replied quietly. He waved his hand dismissively. You did. Maybe you don't remember saying it. That line hit me with a cold, familiar sting. He'd used it before, slipping little doubts into my mind like seeds he hoped would take root. If he could convince me I was forgetful, confused, incapable, then control would seem natural. I watched him flip through the documents, pointing at blank spaces for signatures. These forms ensure everything runs smoothly when you know things change. We don't want chaos when your memory really starts to go. The casual cruelty of that sentence cut deeper than any physical wound. He didn't even soften it. Didn't even pretend to consider how it landed. It was spoken as though he had already decided who I was becoming. A woman disappearing, fading, unable to think for herself. But I remembered everything. Every late-night shift. Every fever I nursed him through. Every birthday I scraped savings together to celebrate. Every moment I gave him the world with my bare hands. And now he stood in my kitchen, implying I couldn't even trust my mind. He sat across from me, voice lowering into practiced warmth. Mom, we're just planning ahead. I don't want you to worry about anything. That's what good sons do. The words were sweet. The tone was syrup thick. But underneath, the threat pulsed. Then he added the line that revealed everything. If we don't do this now, it'll be a mess later. And I won't have time to deal with it. Time to deal with it. Not care for me. Not protect me. Deal with me. He tapped the papers with an impatient finger. Let's sign today. Just sign the forms. It takes 5 minutes. I shook my head. I'm not signing anything until I understand it. His jaw clenched. His eyes narrowed. For a moment, he dropped the act, and his real expression surfaced. Cold. Annoyed. Calculating. Mom, he said slowly. Don't make me force the issue. Force. The word sounded too natural in his mouth. He gathered the papers abruptly and stood up. Fine. I'll come back later. But you'd better be ready by then. I'm not playing around. He left without another word, the front door slamming harder than necessary. The silence he left behind pressed against my heart. The sweet boy I raised wasn't in that slam. The man who stormed out was a stranger wearing my son's face. And for the first time, I understood the gravity of the lawyer's warning. If I didn't act soon, if I didn't protect myself, if I let this continue, I wouldn't be signing papers. I'd be signing away my life. After my son slammed the door behind him, I stood motionless in the middle of my kitchen, listening to the fading echo of his anger. The house felt different, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. For years, my home had been my sanctuary. Now it felt like a place I needed to defend. I forced myself to move. I pulled out a folder from the drawer where I kept important papers. Birth certificates, insurance documents, my original will, receipts for the house repairs I had paid for myself. My hands trembled as I spread everything out on the dining table. Every document told the story of a life I had built carefully, painfully, with love and sacrifice. And now someone, my own son, wanted to rewrite that story without my permission. I compared what I had with the copies the lawyer had slipped into my purse. The differences were alarming. My original will left small, thoughtful gifts to people who had stood by me over the years. My neighbor, my late sister's daughter, the church pantry that had supported me during hard times. My son was still the primary beneficiary, of course, but the document recognized the other connections that mattered. His version erased all of that. Every line pointed to him. Every clause tightened the noose. Even worse was the medical authorization form. Mine emphasized personal autonomy. His version transferred all authority to him. Instantly, automatically, without any medical review. The more I read, the more my breath came in shallow bursts. The hotline worker's words echoed in my mind. You're in a vulnerable position. People don't always show their intentions openly. I needed a second professional opinion, someone who could confirm I wasn't misunderstanding anything. So I made another call, this time to the lawyer's office. I asked if we could meet privately. The receptionist hesitated, then said the attorney had anticipated this and told her to call him immediately if I reached out. He phoned back within minutes. Are you safe? he asked first, not bothering with greetings. Yes, I whispered. For now. Good. Listen carefully. Those documents were not drafted for your benefit. They were drafted for control. I closed my eyes. Hearing it again hurt, but it also strengthened something inside me. Something that had been crushed under years of guilt and motherly softness. Can you come to the office? He asked. No, I said quickly. He'll come back soon. He paused. Then we need to prepare. Do you have access to your own identification, banking records, and your house documents? Yes. Good. Pack them together. Don't leave anything he could claim or misuse. I looked around the table. The documents seemed to glow with new importance. Mrs. Parker, the lawyer continued, voice low and firm. If he returns and urges you to sign anything, pretend to cooperate. If he steps into another room, that's your moment. Grab your essentials and leave the house. I'll arrange a safe meeting place. My heart hammered painfully. You really think I'm in danger? I think his intentions are not what he claims. And I think you need to protect yourself before he makes another move. Before he makes another move. I nodded slowly, even though he couldn't see me. All right. We agreed on a neutral meeting spot 2 miles away. A public place with cameras, where I would be easy to find if anything went wrong. After hanging up, I packed everything quietly. Identification. Date. Original will. Bank statements. Medical records. A small envelope of savings I kept hidden for emergencies. A change of clothes. Then I placed it all in a tote bag and tucked it under the armchair cushion closest to the front door. Minutes later, I heard his car. His footsteps approached the house, steady, confident, as if he were returning to claim something already decided. I sat at the table, the papers he wanted neatly arranged in front of me. He came in without knocking. Ready to sign? He asked, voice smooth but eyes sharp. Yes, I said softly. He relaxed instantly, mistaking my calm for surrender. He began sorting the documents he wanted. I'll just step into the kitchen and grab a pen. The moment he turned his back and walked toward the drawers, my heart leapt into my throat. His footsteps grew faint. Then the drawer opened. That was my cue. I stood up, grabbed the tote bag from beneath the armchair, and walked out the door. Not fast. Not running. Just walking with purpose. Every step felt like stepping out of a cage I didn't know I'd been living in. Behind me, I heard him call. Mom? I didn't look back. For the first time, I wasn't the one he controlled. For the first time, I chose myself. And I walked. I didn't stop walking until I reached the end of my street. My heart pounded so hard it blurred my hearing, but my feet carried me forward with a steadiness I didn't know I still possessed. Cars passed. Birds sang. Life continued around me as though my world hadn't tilted on its axis. 2 blocks away, I finally allowed myself to breathe again. The lawyer was already waiting at the designated meeting spot. A small community cafe near the courthouse. He stood when he saw me, concern pulsing through his expression. You did the right thing, he said after I sat down. Now we need to make sure you're protected. He pulled out a folder of his own. Inside were printouts, notes, and copies of the very documents my son had tried to make me sign. He went through each one carefully, explaining line by line what the consequences would have been. His voice was calm but firm. Your property would have transferred to him within 90 days, he said, tapping a clause near the bottom. And with the medical authority documents, he would have had the power to declare you incapable. My breath caught. Even if I wasn't? Yes, he said softly. That's why I warned you. The lawyer then made another call, to an elder protection unit affiliated with the county. They asked if I'd be willing to give a statement. My hands trembled at the thought, but I said yes. If I didn't speak now, I might lose the little control I still had. Within an hour, an investigator arrived, a woman in her 40s with a steady, compassionate demeanor. She listened carefully as I recounted everything. The rushed visits, the hidden documents, the gaslighting, the lawyer's warning. She took notes silently, her brows tightening as I spoke. Mrs. Parker, she said finally. This appears to be a coordinated attempt at financial exploitation. We'll open an investigation immediately. Immediately. The word felt like a lifeline. She asked if my son had access to my accounts. No, I answered. Not yet. Good, she said. We need to keep it that way. She advised me not to return home alone. The lawyer offered to accompany me long enough to gather essential belongings. I agreed, though shame washed over me. Shame for needing protection from my own child. As we approached my house, my son's car was already in the driveway. He stood on the porch, pacing, phone in hand. When he saw me, his expression twisted. Relief, anger, confusion, all swirling in a storm. Where did you go? He demanded. Mom, you can't just walk off like that. You scared me. The false concern in his voice made my stomach turn. The investigator stepped between us. Sir, I'm with the County Elder Protection Unit. We need to ask you some questions. My son froze. Then he smiled, quickly, too quickly. Questions? About what? I've been helping my mother. She's been having memory issues. There is no medical documentation of that, she replied flatly. He opened his mouth to argue, but she held up a hand. Sir, we've reviewed the documents you presented at the lawyer's office. They include conflicting statements about your mother's capacity and significant financial transfers. We need to determine whether coercion was involved. His face drained of color. He looked at me, not with anger, not with fear, but with calculation, as though trying to assess how much I knew. Mom, he said slowly, you're misunderstanding. I was trying to protect you. The investigator didn't let him continue. Sir, please step aside. This is now an official inquiry. He took a step back, hands raised, but his eyes never left me. The warmth I once knew in those eyes was gone. In its place was something cold, sharp, almost accusing. Inside the house, nothing looked disturbed, but it no longer felt like mine. The investigator walked through with me, checking locks, windows, and documents. She advised me to stay elsewhere for a few days, long enough to ensure the situation was safe. The lawyer drove me to a temporary residence arranged through a senior protection program. The room was small but peaceful. For the first time in days, I sat on the bed and let myself cry. Not out of fear, but out of heartbreak. My son's plan was unraveling. Officials were involved. Questions were being asked. And the truth was emerging faster than he could contain it. But even as justice took shape, something inside me cracked in a way that couldn't be repaired. A mother prepares her heart for many things: aging, loneliness, the distance of grown children. But nothing prepares you for the moment you realize your child was ready to steal your life piece by piece. And nothing prepares you for the crushing relief of narrowly escaping it. 3 days passed before the investigator contacted me again. Each day felt like a slow, heavy exhale after years of holding my breath. I stayed in the small temporary residence, watching sunlight move across unfamiliar walls, thinking of everything I'd worked for and everything I'd nearly lost. Then the call came. Mrs. Parker, the investigator said, we've completed the preliminary review. We need you present for the formal conversation with your son. I didn't ask what they'd found. I already knew enough. The meeting was scheduled at the lawyer's office, the same room where everything had begun. When I arrived, the lawyer greeted me with a sympathetic nod. There was no pity in his eyes, only a steady respect I clung to like a handrail. My son arrived a few minutes later. He walked in with the confidence of a man who believed he could explain anything away. That same rehearsed smile stretched across his face, but there was panic behind it, thin cracks he tried to hide. Mom, he said, as though stepping into a normal family meeting. This whole thing has gotten out of hand. The investigator raised her hand. Let's begin. We sat around the table, me, my son, the investigator, and the lawyer. The documents were stacked neatly in the center like a silent witness. The investigator flipped open the folder. We reviewed the documents your son attempted to have you sign. The combination of medical authority, immediate property transfer, and revised will structure raises serious concerns. My son forced a smile. Concerns? I was looking out for her. She forgets things. She mixes details up. I was trying to help. I looked at him, really looked at him. waiting to see a flicker of remorse. But all I saw was fear of losing control. The investigator slid a printed statement toward him. We interviewed third-party professionals, including the attorney who prepared these documents. He reported that you insisted on urgency and claimed your mother was incapable of understanding her affairs. He opened his mouth, closed it again. The investigator continued, "There is no medical record of cognitive decline. None. And your mother's explanation has been consistent." He bristled. "She doesn't even remember half." "She remembers everything," I said quietly. My voice surprised him. It surprised me too. It wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. But it carried the weight of every sleepless night, every sacrifice, every moment I chose love over suspicion. "I remember the questions you asked me," I said. "The pressure. The guilt. The little comments to make me doubt myself. I remember every line on those papers you tried to make me sign." He looked away. "You wanted control. Not to help me. To use me." His jaw tightened. "I would never hurt you. But you already did," I said, my voice steady. "You took my trust. You took my peace. You tried to take my life decisions before I was even gone." The lawyer cleared his throat softly and slid another document across the table. "We also uncovered inconsistencies in the information you provided. You told my office she had already reviewed the documents. She clearly had not." My son's composure cracked. "That's not what I meant," he snapped. "She's old, okay? She needs someone to manage things before she ruins everything she worked for. Before she ruins everything she worked for." The irony struck the room like lightning. The investigator spoke firmly. "Your mother's home, finances, and medical authority remain fully under her control. And based on our findings, she has chosen to implement protections to ensure this situation cannot happen again." He whipped his head toward me. You're locking me out?" I inhaled deeply. "I'm protecting myself." "For what?" "From your own son." His voice cracked between disbelief and outrage. "From the man you've become," I answered softly. Silence fell. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Necessary. The investigator concluded the meeting with a list of required follow-up actions and protective measures. My son tried to interrupt twice but was shut down each time. The more he spoke, the more the truth of his intentions revealed itself. By the end, his face had drained of all color. When the meeting adjourned, he stood abruptly, chair scraping the floor. For a moment, he hovered near the door, as if searching for one last argument that could make everything bend to his will. But the room had already chosen its truth. He finally muttered, "Fine. Do whatever you want," and walked out without looking back. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Not a slam. Just a quiet, final end. The lawyer approached me gently. "You handled that with remarkable strength." Strength. I hadn't felt strong. I had felt heartbroken, terrified, betrayed. But maybe strength doesn't always feel like a roar. Maybe sometimes it feels like sitting still while the world shakes around you. And refusing to be moved. As I left the office, the afternoon sun hit my face, warm and steady. For the first time in a long time, I felt the air in my lungs belong entirely to me. My voice. My decisions. My life. All still mine. I returned home later that evening. Not with fear, but with a strange, steady calm. The sun was setting, washing the street in orange light, and for a moment, everything looked exactly as it had before the chaos began. But I was not the same woman who had walked out of that door with trembling hands and a racing heart. I stepped inside and closed the door gently behind me. My home felt different now. Not tainted, not threatening, simply mine again. Truly mine. Every photograph on the shelf, every plant by the window, every creak in the floorboards belonged to a life I had built with my own strength. A life I had nearly handed over to someone who didn't deserve it. I set down my bag, walked into the living room, and let the quiet wrap around me. It was no longer the silence of fear. It was the silence of ownership, of safety regained. The investigator had left me with clear instructions. New locks, new protections, legal safeguards to prevent any future attempt at manipulating my documents. The lawyer arranged to update my will properly, restoring everything exactly the way I intended. My medical directives were rewritten as well, reaffirming my autonomy. For the first time in weeks, I slept without waking in panic. My dreams were calm, unbothered, full of familiar faces of people who had loved me honestly. In the days that followed, I moved with a new awareness. I checked my mail more carefully. I organized my files with precision. I shredded old papers that might be misused. I met with the lawyer again, finalizing protections that would outlive me, not out of fear, but out of wisdom. I also spent a great deal of time thinking about my son. Not with anger. Not even with bitterness. Just understanding. People imagine that betrayal from a child is loud, a dramatic break, a clear moment when everything shatters. But more often it begins quietly, in small excuses, in tiny shifts, in the slow erosion of consideration and kindness. I had ignored those shifts because I loved him. Mothers do that. We soften every edge. We give second chances. We build bridges out of hope. But love without boundaries becomes a door anyone can walk through. And he walked through it with intentions I never could have imagined. And yet, I still loved him. Love doesn't disappear just because trust does. But I no longer trusted him with the parts of me that mattered. One afternoon, as I sat outside sipping tea, my neighbor approached. She had heard something happened. Small towns tend to whisper, but she didn't pry. She simply sat beside me, handed me a small slice of banana bread, and said, "You look lighter." Lighter. It surprised me how true that was. I wasn't carrying the weight of denial anymore. I wasn't bending myself in half to excuse behavior that had been harming me for years. I wasn't waiting for the boy he used to be to reappear. I was living for myself again. I found joy in simple things. The morning breeze, the chirping of birds, the smell of fresh laundry. Things I had once taken for granted now felt like small victories. And little by little, I allowed myself to heal. I read books I had put off. I visited old friends. I returned to the church pantry as a volunteer, offering support to others who had faced hardships invisibly. Most importantly, I reclaimed my sense of boundaries. For the first time in my life, I understood that protecting myself wasn't selfish. It was necessary. When the investigator followed up weeks later, she told me the case was closed and my son had been formally warned. Any further attempt to tamper with my legal affairs would be met with immediate consequences. I thanked her, but what mattered most wasn't the legal protection. It was the emotional one. I had drawn a line, and I would not allow anyone, even my own child, to cross it again. That night, as I sat at my dining table looking at my reorganized documents, I felt a deep, quiet peace. Not triumph. Not vindication. Just the soft relief of a woman who saved herself before someone else took everything she built. I whispered into the stillness. My life is mine. And this time I truly believed it. A week after everything settled, I sat alone in my living room with the late afternoon sun drifting across the carpet. My papers, now updated, protected, and fully mine, rested neatly in a single folder on the coffee table. The edges were crisp. The signatures were clear. There were no hidden pages anymore. No buried traps. No quiet betrayals waiting between the lines. Just the truth. Just my voice. Just my life. I reached out and closed the folder. The soft click felt like sealing a door that had been open too long. A door I hadn't realized was letting danger in. My fingers rested on the cover for a moment, tracing the small indentations in the leather, and I felt something inside me settle. Not anger. Not revenge. Just certainty. For the first time in years, I knew exactly where I stood, and exactly who I needed to protect. I got up, walked to the hallway closet, and placed the folder on the top shelf beside a small fireproof lockbox. I turned the key, heard the latch click into place, and let out a long, steady breath. A simple gesture, but powerful, because it meant one thing. This was never his to claim. The house was quiet around me, not an empty quiet, but a peaceful one. A quiet that belonged to someone who chose herself, who listened to warning signs, who ran when running was survival and stayed when staying was safe. And if you've stayed with me through this story, if you found strength, clarity, or comfort in it, if you want to hear more true stories like mine, Stories of resilience, awakening, and the courage to stand your ground. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Your support helps bring stories like this one to life. Thank you for listening.